Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I hope you're doing well, and if you're new here, what we do on Unfortunate Ends is talk about people who have had tragic, and as the name suggests, unfortunate ends to their life. Anyway, let's jump into today's video. Jean-Jacques Dessalines was one of the most critical figures in the early history of the Haitian state. Originally enslaved in the early 1790s, he joined the incipient war which had broken out throughout the island of Hispaniola, eventually becoming emperor of the newly established state of Haiti in 1804. But then just 2 years later, he was assassinated. Who killed Dessalines, and why? The early life of the man who would later become the emperor of Haiti is shrouded in mystery. It is assumed that he was born around the year 1758, though exactly where and when is not clear. Some scholars have proposed that he was born in West Africa and brought to the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean to work on the sugar plantations there as a slave in his youth. Others argue that he was more than likely born as a slave on a plantation in Hispaniola. Whatever the truth of this, we know that by his early adult years, he was living as a slave in Hispaniola and had the name Jean-Jacques Duclos. This name was derived from his owner, Henri Duclos. Well, at the time, it was commonplace for enslaved peoples in the Caribbean to be given the surname of the plantation owner. In the second half of the 18th century, the island of Hispaniola was split into two spheres of influence, as it is today. To better understand Jean-Jacques' story, we need to dive into the island's history. Following the European discovery of the New World in 1492, the Spanish had established their first Caribbean colonies on the island and renamed it Hispaniola. However, in the course of the 17th century, aggressive French planters had begun establishing themselves on the western part of the island, where they set up extensive sugar plantations fueled by slave labour in the shape of Africans forcibly brought to the Caribbean from West Africa. Unable to expel the French from Hispaniola, the Spanish eventually recognised the French presence on the island in 1697. This was as part of the Peace of Utrecht and Ryswick, which brought the War of the League of Augsburg in Europe to a conclusion. The Spanish ceded the western part of the island to France and retained the central and eastern sections of the island to themselves. In this division lie the roots of the partition of the island into the modern-day countries of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Much of Jean-Jacques' early adulthood is nearly as obscure as his childhood. Little is known about him, other than that he rose to the position of being a foreman on the Duclos estate in the 1780s, before his freedom was bought in 1788 by a Mr. Dessalines, a freed black man himself whose surname Jean-Jacques now adopted. His story really begins in 1791. That year, a slave revolt broke out in the northern plains of the French-held part of Hispaniola, led by Jean-François Papillon and Georges Biassou. Dessalines was soon involved and became a commander in the expanding rebel army as the initial slave rebellion expanded to become a revolution to free Western Hispaniola from French rule. During these years, the rebellion also expanded into the Spanish-held parts of the island and began to draw in contingents of British troops as Hispaniola became a theatre of the wider French Revolutionary Wars, which engulfed Europe and the European states as overseas colonies in the aftermath of the French Revolution of 1789. Throughout these years, Dessalines continued to rise in the rebel leadership and became a close confidant of Toussaint Louverture, the rising figure in the independence movement. In the mid-1790s, Louverture switched the allegiances of the rebel forces back to France when the revolutionary government in Paris agreed to end slavery in France's colonies in 1794. Thus, the rebels who had started their rebellion in 1791 to overthrow French rule now were allied with the French government in seeking to establish control over the whole of the island from the Spanish and the British expeditionary force. The war raged back and forth across Hispaniola for the next several years. However, a government was now beginning to materialize, led largely by former slaves and headed by Louverture as Governor General of the new Republic of Saint-Dominique, with Dessalines as one of his leading military commanders. The new Republic owed nominal allegiance to the revolutionary government in Paris, and by 1800 it had secured control over a great portion of Hispaniola. It was the great success which Louverture and his regime enjoyed during these years, which unwittingly paved the way for his demise and Dessalines' ascendancy. In 1801, the new leader of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was unhappy with the level of independence acquired by Louverture and his government, sent a military expedition to the Caribbean to reimpose direct control over the colony. They arrived in the early spring of 1802. In the resulting military campaign, Louverture was deposed, and the French temporarily took control of western Hispaniola. At first, Dessalines accepted the new dispensation and surrendered to the new regime. However, within months he would become the leader of a fresh rebellion against French rule. The spark came in 1803 when news reached Hispaniola that Napoleon's government was set on reintroducing slavery in the French colonies. In response, Dessalines and the many former slaves and mixed-race citizens of Hispaniola revolted. In a whirlwind military campaign, the French expeditionary force was defeated in 1803 and expelled from western Hispaniola, making Dessalines one of the most successful combatants against Napoleonic France. Now, on the 1st of January 1804, Dessalines, as the new Governor General, proclaimed the entire island of Hispaniola to be an independent country. As its name, the rebels chose the title for the island of the native Arawak people. They called it Haiti, and during the following September 1804, Dessalines proclaimed himself as its first emperor, Jacques I. Dessalines' rule was short, but substantial and bloody. In May 1805, he saw the promulgation of Haiti's first constitution. This formally abolished slavery in the new state of Haiti, making it the first country in the Americas to do so. However, working conditions were poor throughout the country during the years ahead, as workers, even while technically free, still had to work extensive hours in harsh conditions on the sugar plantations in order to keep the economy functioning. As had Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines demanded that all those who weren't of European ancestry either work as soldiers to defend the nation or as labourers on the plantations to raise crops and help sustain the nation. His forces were strict in imposing this, to the extent that many felt as if they were enslaved again. Dessalines also adopted a severely anti-French stance. Within weeks of the establishment of his rule in 1804, a massacre of the French colonial population had been undertaken. This ethnic cleansing resulted in the deaths of somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 French settlers and decimated the colonial population. In tandem, Dessalines undertook a military campaign into the Spanish parts of Hispaniola in an effort to track down and kill the remaining French troops who had fled into the central and eastern parts of the island in 1803. More broadly, any white Europeans were forbidden from owning property and had their lands confiscated. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this highly aggressive and autocratic style of rule gave rise to some resistance. In particular, the anti-French and anti-European policies favoured by Dessalines were highly resented by the peoples of both African and European ancestry, as well as those who felt at least some affinity with the French and Spanish of Hispaniola. This resistance crystallized in 1806 around two central figures, Alexandre Sabet-Pétion and Henri Christophe, two leaders during the rebellion of the 1790s and early 1800s. By the autumn of 1806, they were overseeing a revolt against the Emperor Jacques, and it would quickly topple his rule. There are conflicting reports about how Dessalines was killed. We do know that it occurred on the 17th of October 1806, near Larnage to the north of the capital of Haiti, Port-au-Prince. One report has it that Dessalines actually entered Pétion's residence to negotiate peace terms when he was attacked and killed by the rebels' followers. A second suggests he was placed under arrest near the capital by Pétion and Christophe's forces, and murdered while he was in custody. Another, perhaps the most widely promoted version of Dessalines' demise, states that he was killed by his own supporters on the way to Larnage. In this rendition, Dessalines was shot and stabbed several times by a violent mob who subsequently split his head open with a sabre and finished him off with 3 lethal stabs from a dagger. Once he died, the crowd is said to have shouted, "The tyrant is killed." Whatever the exact truth of his death, there is no doubt about the end result. Just over 2 years after his coronation, Jacques I, Emperor of Haiti, was killed. Thus died the first of 2 men who would ever rule Haiti as the Emperor of the small Caribbean island. Following his assassination on the 17th of October 1806, Dessalines' body was mutilated and left where it lay. At the time, there were many against giving him a proper burial, believing he was undeserving of one. Yet a humble woman named Dede Basile took the emperor's mutilated body, giving Dessalines a proper burial. A monument was set up on the road between Port-au-Prince and Larnage, marking the approximate place where he is said to have been killed. It is believed that shortly after his death, many of the late emperor's soldiers and loyal followers decided to change their last name, which in most cases was the name of their former slave owners. But their new surname was now Jean-Jacques, in honor of Dessalines. For the remainder of the 19th century, Dessalines was generally reviled by generations of Haitians for his autocratic ways. However, by the beginning of the 20th century, Dessalines began to be reassessed as an icon of Haitian nationalism. For example, the national anthem of Haiti, Les Dessaliniens, written in 1903, is named in his honor. In the months following his death, the young Empire of Haiti was split into 2 countries, with Christophe ruling the state of Haiti in the north and Pétion elected as the first head of the Republic of Haiti in the south. Christophe would eventually establish himself as the first king of Haiti in 1811, but his reign only lasted until 1820, at which time the 2 splinter kingdoms reunited into the modern state of Haiti. It did not escape its autocratic birth easily. A second empire was eventually promulgated in 1849, when Faustin I ruled as emperor for the next 10 years. Further extended experiments in republic government followed, but in the 20th century, the country spent 3 decades under the autocratic dictatorship of the Duvalier family between the 1950s and the 1980s. Thus, the rule of Jean-Jacques Dessalines between 1804 and 1806, though brief, was a template for the unstable politics which Haiti would suffer from for much of the modern era. Thank you so much for watching this video on Jean-Jacques Dessalines. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave me a like and a comment down below. And if you're new, why not subscribe? If you have any suggestions, you can leave them down in the comments, or there's a link to my email and Instagram in the description. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next unfortunate end. Thanks.